Welcome to this IQT podcast. My name is Sarah Sewall, and I'm the Executive Vice President for National Innovation Policy at In-Q-Tel, where I work on the dual-use technology questions that matter for national security and great power competition. And today we're going to talk about positioning, navigation, and timing information, or PNT data, which undergirds modern economies and infrastructure. PNT allows the synchronization of financial transactions or transportation, and it supports navigation and geographic-based services. Most citizens get their PNT data for free from government-funded satellites. It's available almost everywhere, so integrated into our daily lives that it's essentially invisible, which is why it's been called the silent utility. Yet satellite-based PNT data is vulnerable to disruptions, and those disruptions could prove catastrophic, paralyzing much activity and costing the nation up to $1 billion a day. Enhancing the security and redundancy of PNT access, therefore, is critical for economic and national security. China is improving the diversity of sources for PNT data that it provides both at home and to global users. The United States, however, continues to rely predominantly on its legacy GPS systems, which provides civilian PNT data. And so the question for today's discussion is, what can or should the United States do to enhance the resilience of PNT data that is so vital for American critical infrastructure and economic activity? And we have two experts here today to explore this question. I'm going to introduce them. Dana Goward is president of the Resilient Navigation and Timing Foundation. That's a nonprofit organization that seeks to protect GPS satellites, signals, and users. His distinguished career in the Coast Guard included serving as the U.S. Maritime Navigation Authority, and he's a member of the President's National Space-Based Positioning, Navigation, and Timing Advisory Board. Thanks for joining us, Dana.
Pleasure.
Sivananthan is a senior technology architect at In-Q-Tel, where she works on next-generation communications, compute, sensing, and microelectronics. She has a doctorate in electrical engineering, and she previously developed and managed semiconductor R&D at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Did I get that right, Abhi?
Yep.
And she also has been a fellow on Capitol Hill. So it's great to have you in the conversation. Thanks for joining us. Let's begin. Abhi, satellite-provided PNT is available without costs to users across the globe, and most of us take it for granted, but it's a relatively recent development. Can you describe how it evolved technologically?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Sarah. So I guess to start with, PNT refers to the sensors, the software, the chips, and the systems that provide you with information for positioning or where you are, navigation, and timing, which synchronizes time accurately across the entire world. It's a really broad set of technology that is part of all of our daily lives. As Sarah mentioned earlier, it's used for synchronizing financial transactions. It's used for synchronizing your cell phone calls, navigation of airplanes, and for data used by Google Maps to help you navigate and help your Uber drivers find you. While PNT spans much larger than GPS alone, a lot of it relies upon GPS, which uses satellites to distribute timing information. GPS is operated as a U.S.-owned utility that provides users with timing information and has been funded and maintained by the U.S. government for dual-purpose use for decades. The U.S. developed GPS in the 1970s, and in large part because GPS was provided as a free and open service, it went very quickly from solely defense use to being embedded across consumer devices. What we're seeing today is many other countries have also realized the benefits, both for military purposes, but then also for economic purposes, and are pursuing their own systems to reduce dependence on foreign nations, and also develop their own ecosystems domestically. Many of these plans have been in the work for decades, and we're just now starting to see these systems come online in the last couple of years. And so we're seeing a major shift globally from a very GPS-dominated world to timing signal that's provided by a number of different systems, with 4 individual space-based systems for global coverage and a number of regional systems as well. As GPS has become more pervasive in our lives, we're seeing companies that are both large and small working to diversify PNT to expand solely beyond using GPS as kind of your sole stop system. And so over the last 10 years and into the future, we're seeing it become a lot more democratized, much more global. And there's a lot of startups that are developing really exciting new technologies to complement GPS systems. And so from our perspective, we're not seeing a single, perfect alternative to GPS, but feel there's a host of options that are coming online to complement and provide alternative capabilities as needed.
So rapid change behind us and rapid change ahead. That's great. So Dana, why should Americans care about the security of their space-based provided PNT, of the GPS system? And do you think that the dependence on PNT will continue to grow such that we should be even more concerned about future resilience of that data?
Well, Sarah, it's an excellent question. So if you care about your technology, if you care about the ability to carry on life as we have been doing in 2023, you should care about the resilience and the continuity of the PNT services that undergirds all of that. So over the last 40 years, highly precise PNT, free of charge from the global positioning system, has transformed our society. It has brought on all kinds of additional capabilities, and its data is used to enable any number of applications like Avi referred to, but also the timing and the rest of the signal is used to enable the functioning of IT systems as well. So you have this dual characteristic that is essential to essentially every technology. So, it's something that we need to be concerned about, even though it's invisible. And it's something that we're going to need to continue to be concerned about and have, because life without the kind of PNT that we have right now, easily available, is almost unimaginable. It was a near existential threat for the United States if we have a major disruption to GPS and our other PNT services.
And our reliance on these technologies in a world of self-driving cars or precision agriculture could just become greater over time. So that's a sobering thought. And so, can you help folks who have joined us better understand why satellite-provided PNT is so vulnerable? What could happen to it? And as we think about modernizing GPS satellites, is that the solution?
Sure, GPS is vulnerable almost by design. So the signals are necessarily very weak because they come from space and because they can't interfere with each other, else it would not function. And also because in order to ensure adoption as widely and broadly as possible, we've made the signal specifications public. So because the signals are weak, they can be easily disrupted accidentally or maliciously. And because the signal specifications are available, a reasonably sophisticated hacker can easily imitate the GPS signals and lure a user off into a different direction, making them or others that are observing them think they're someplace that they're not. The signals can also be a vector for malware to infect different IT systems. So there's a lot of concern there. They're just very vulnerable by their very nature.
Some people talk about jamming and spoofing. Can you describe what that means?
Sure. Jamming is the GPS radio frequency equivalent of service denial of an IT system. And spoofing is hacking it, imitating it, providing false information.
So will modernization take care of that whole litany of potential threats that you just described?
So the GPS modernization that's going on right now is good and it's necessary. We should support that unequivocally. Unfortunately, the very nature, the physical structure of GPS signals and the nature of the system is such that those improvements will only be marginal. And in fact, the GPS modernization program that the Department of Defense is undertaking right now really will only benefit and make marginal improvements for military users. So yes, GPS modernization is good and necessary, but it is not the answer. What we really need is a systems of systems approach. In fact, the Department of Transportation has opined since 2008, most recently in 2021, that what we need are space-based signals, as we have, and perhaps more space-based signals, time over fiber, and a series of terrestrial broadcasts such that users have P&T information delivered to them by completely independent means that are do not share the same failure mode, so that one threat, one problem, which would affect one method of delivery, will not affect the others.
So great. So what you're explaining, I think, is that redundancy of sourcing for PNT will be really important. And what Abhi was talking about earlier was innovation in PNT. And I want to come back to that. Abhi, can you talk a little bit about what are the physical domains, or what are the use cases that are emerging that are driving some of the innovation that you referenced earlier, and how, what are the impediments to progress in the kinds of technologies that you're watching begin to come into the commercial space?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So first, I'd say, as we've been talking about, more and more industry sectors and consumers are relying on PNT, and there are regions where GPS just doesn't work as well. For example, as the commercial maritime market expands, users need alternative options to GPS because GPS signals don't penetrate well underwater. Similarly, industries working underground, such as mining or even deep in a mall, need alternative options because you just don't have signals that can get through those environments. And you also mentioned precision agriculture. There are a number of industries that are seeking higher accuracy timing than you can get from today's free open GPS systems. And so I think there are newer use cases that just need more advanced technology that are driving some of these alternative solutions. The second thing I'd say is there are a number of systems like data centers, right, like financial transactions that can't afford an outage. And so they are seeking fallback options, such as local networks for distributed timing, should there be an issue. And I think as these new technologies come online, one of the challenges that we're definitely seeing is the pace of innovation is really fast, and P&T data and systems are embedded very deeply within a sector. And so keeping pace and swapping in new technology can be difficult and can take a long time.
Thanks. That's great. Well, let's shift to how other countries are addressing these issues, and let's talk a little bit about China, that has been doing so much to develop, its space-based capabilities to include a global navigation satellite system that provides PNT data that now rivals the U.S. GPS system. Can you explain to folks, Dana, how China is seeking to achieve the goals that you were recommending, which is, resilience and redundancy? How do they solve that problem for their own national interest?
Sure. China learned quite a while back that during one of the Taiwan Strait crises that it could not rely on GPS when GPS failed them as they were trying to launch the missiles towards Taiwan. So that began a decades-long effort to develop their own global navigation satellite system, which they've done, and which is newer and more pervasive, actually, in many ways, and more accurate than GPS. But because they found that they could not rely on space entirely, they've gone steps further, and they've deployed a complex terrestrial timing and navigation system that includes over 20,000 kilometers of fiber and a high-power, low-frequency broadcast system that covers the entire nation. And they're synchronizing all of that with their space-based signals so that their military and their civilian users will always have PNT wherever and whenever they need it.
And you spoke earlier, Dana, that this was a system. Is this an example of the system of systems approach that you were recommending?
Absolutely, it's an example of it. In fact, it's interesting that when China first announced that it was taking the systems approach, it actually pirated a graphic from the Department of Transportation's announcement about what the United States should do that was published in 2008. So we established the graphic. They took it and ran with it, and we're still looking at the graphic, wondering what we should do.
Well, I want to now ask, Abhi, you said earlier there is no one silver bullet. It's never going to be just one solution. You talked about a diversity of use cases and a diversity of domains. Where do you think technology innovation can contribute most to the kind of system of systems approach that Dana is describing?
Yeah, I mean, I think So I would say as you said, it's hard to pick one winner, right? We see the P&T landscape as consisting of multiple different segments, and we're seeing startup activity and activity by the large traditional players in the space across the ecosystem. We've talked about a lot about space-based timing, which is where today's GPS system lies. And in this space, we're seeing startups become more active. They're leveraging the lower launch costs to get to space, as well as advances in small satellite technology to launch their own constellation and provide LEO-based PNT services that can augment the U.S. government signals with higher power signals and more modern waveforms that might be harder to jam. Uh,
Leo satellite?
yes, yes. So just a different orbit than what you traditionally use. It's closer to Earth,
And
and so
so
you can have
stronger.
stronger
Right.
signals. Exactly. Um, and I think kind of coming down one level, you have that next layer of terrestrial distribution, or how do you distribute signals on land without having to go to space? So still very infrastructure heavy, typically led by government or municipalities. But there are a number of startups that are looking at how do you use things like fiber optics for distribution of signals in metro areas. Or how do you use signal processing combined with terrestrial features to augment the information your cellular device is receiving, for example, to provide higher accuracy. Um, and I think as you take it one layer down, you have sensors on your phone, right? Even your iPhone has sensors that can aid in navigation. These type of sensors or devices often provide real-time updates over the course of minutes. And that's sort of relative to an initial starting point, but they still require working with GPS. But we're seeing a lot of really interesting activity in making those sensors more accurate while maintaining the small form factor and low cost, using unique signal processing, using things like AI-based error correction, or even new types of materials. So I think there's a lot of exciting work there. And finally, there is a subset of companies and research that are looking to build brand new types of devices that don't need GPS or any sort of satellite infrastructure and can still give you really precise information. Um, these are being commercialized today. We're seeing some very promising demonstrations, especially around using things like quantum sensors for this kind of sensing.
Wow. So quantum has been, the future sort of gold standard for a long time held out there. What are the timelines for some of these more ambitious innovations?
Yeah. I think in terms of timelines, like especially for quantum, there's demonstrations now, right? Like there's been demonstrations in labs. People are planning to do demonstrations in operational environments. I think it's much more of, how long will it take to put that into form factor? That's smaller, that's a little bit more rugged, but it's work that's happening today that we're very excited about.
And do you envision that the adoption will happen with small user bases and sort of unique use cases and then gradually perhaps penetrate into a wider commercial use?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier, right? There's a diversity of use cases. Each use case is going to have different needs around form factor, around accuracy. And so I think we'll start to see these sensors as they come online, find the right use case and then grow from there.
So sorry, Dana, go ahead.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with. I mean, clearly there are lots of technologies out there, lots of capabilities, and there are going to be more. But the challenge is adoption. So there will always be a demand for commercial services from high demand users, folks with lots of money. The financial sector has limited geographic footprint and all kinds of money to buy atomic clocks and fiber, for example. So they're not ever really going to be a problem. But the GPS, free GPS, again, over the last 40 years has transformed our society, right? And it's been widely adopted in ways that we probably have no appreciation of yet until there's a significant problem. Hopefully that will never come. But in addition to these niche cases, the special use cases, or the high demand users, we also have a requirement in this country for a graceful fallback in the event of a major solar storm, enemy attack, cyber problem, or anything else that could give us a significant challenge with GPS services here in the United States. Unlike China and some other nations, we don't have a graceful fallback. And that is a significant strategic and tactical disadvantage for us relative to China and some of our other adversaries. And it's also a significant threat on its own, just for the homeland. So government is going to need to get involved first by protecting itself, federal IT systems and solutions. It needs to walk the talk and become resilient as far as P&T, set an example for others, and also give the idea to folks that these technologies, these systems that the government is adopting are going to be around for a while. So it's worthwhile adopting them and incorporating them into their enterprises. And government also needs to be more proactive in lowering the barrier to adoption for those users who will never be able to or want to afford a commercial system. They've had free GPS for 40 years. They're accustomed to P&T being highly precise, freely available as a utility, and they just don't have the wherewithal to go and be one of the more sophisticated and expensive users. So there's a couple places for government leadership here, and we are very much encouraging and hoping that government will finally step up after all these years and exert that leadership and make the nation more resilient in P&T and more secure.
So you are really talking about the corollary from the silent utility moniker that GPS and P&T data has, which is if it's a silent utility, it means it's being used by everybody, it's essential, and government does have some role. And so the question about where does the innovation that Abhi was describing that happens in part driven by government, but also driven by the private sector, how does that then become integrated into the protection of national infrastructure and thinking about resilience for the country as a whole? So this has been a fantastic discussion. Any final thoughts that you would either like to share? Abhi, start with you.
No final thoughts, but yes, I agree. It's it's a very interesting area and one we're closely monitoring because I think it's really promising and very quickly evolving sector.
Dana, last word.
Yep, the seatbelts are not any good if you don't use them, right? So same with technology and systems to make GPS more resilient. From a personal human psychology point of view, as well as a social psychology point of view in terms of governments, we all have a very difficult time being proactive and preventing bad things from happening. I'm like to remind folks that we had over 130 commercial airliners hijacked before 9/11, one of which the hijackers said that they were going to crash into a nuclear power plant if their demands weren't met. Yet we did not, as a nation, take the opportunity before 9/11 to improve airport security, harden the cockpit doors on commercial airliners, and so forth. So imagine how much different the world would be if we had gotten ahead of the bang there and taken some fairly simple steps to protect the nation and our airline customers and users. And a similar case with protecting P&T. We know that there's going to be a significant solar storm at some point in our future that is going to deny service for days, if not longer. We should get ahead of that and prevent the problem rather than waiting to try and sweep up after it already occurs.
Well, we have certainly been a pioneer in this field. And, Abhi is reminding us of the ways in which the U.S. is continuing to pioneer. And Dana is flagging the need to be proactive in thinking about backup systems and resilience in the event of emergency. And all really important messages. Thank you both so much for helping us think both about the importance of P&T and the importance of securing it so that we can continue to rely on it in a world that will become ever more dependent on the same. So really grateful that you could be with us for this conversation. Thanks to everyone who's watching for tuning in to this podcast. Please make sure to subscribe to future podcasts so that you don't miss out, and feel free to leave us reviews or comments. Thanks and goodbye.
Sarah.